in dirty tricks. That's for spies. Thus, you get CSIS, the spies, but they had no training. It was, and unfortunately, the accident happened when they were still in their infancy. Today, it's much better. You may have seen in my report, I have one criticism. I think there should be a single national advisor. The national advisor would determine territorial disputes. You see what happens when you're collecting intelligence, you might think you have a spy ring. And as part of that intelligence, you know there's a break and entry. Well, the break and entry is insignificant compared to the spy ring. So CSIS doesn't want to tell them about the break and entry. If they tell them, they arrest them and they blow up the... So that's the general rationale.
But these are very fundamental things which should have been at the top of the mind of the rulers of the day. The way they are kind of splitting the forces, and then there is no mutual sync or coordination amongst them. The way one thing is being gathered and it is not being used by the other. So the fact is that it was the immaturity of the system. Today, if we don't want to point out responsibilities to some person, which may be an X, Y, or Z, but then certainly the whole system is to be blamed the way the justice could not be done.
Well, you can always attach blame, and then you add an excuse. And the excuse was they were in their first year of operation. That's no comfort to the people that were on the plane. We were told at the commission that things are much better. They communicate quite freely. We expressed skepticism in the report, saying that at any one time it could be going better, but you need to have permanency. That's why you need a national advisor, one man who looks at it and says belongs to CSIS, or it belongs to the RCMP, or it belongs to both. The system, as you point out, in 1985 was inadequate. We hope 2011 it's much better. And how do you know?
In the light of what you're saying, as there were inadequacies of the system, there were inherent lapses, inherent shortcomings in the system, but the fact that the whole conspiracy could not be unraveled. This brings us to a very important point. Going again back on the way the investigations went on till 1995, the speed of the investigations was very slow. Yeah. So was one reason of this investigation being so slow and tardy the fact that the plane was of Air India? Because your report does point out at one point in time that because Air India had been crying, they wanted additional security free of cost, but the Canadian establishments of the time thought that they were just crying wolves, and they were making much ado about nothing. The fact remains that the plane got blown up apart. Where do you think, and this kind of thing is always the mind of the people sitting here in India, that since the plane belonged to Air India, and a lot of people who were traveling on it belonged to Punjab, they were not Canadians, but they were Indo-Canadians. So maybe the interest of the agencies was not to an optimum level.
Well, let me answer you. You've raised several questions. First, the culprits have been identified. They know who did it. The trouble is proving it in a court of law. The question that floated throughout the commission and in Canada from the time it happened, would the authorities have acted differently if it had been Air Canada full of white Anglo-Saxons? And your natural instinct is to say sure. But I don't believe that. I think the trouble with Canadians with respect to this accident initially is we didn't identify with it. We knew there was trouble in India, the storming of the temple. We knew there was assassination. There's a fight in India, and then you hear an Air India plane is blowing up. So the first reaction is, well, an Air India tragedy. It's only as it started to unfold that it became obvious that Canada played a very big role, that insofar as the crash was concerned, Air India can be criticized for a few small things, but it was a Canadian problem that Canadians didn't immediately recognize. I don't want to think it was based on racism. I think it was just the unusual circumstances of the fight in India and an Air India plane off the coast of England. There were people had no idea it even landed in Canada. So it's not really a complete answer, but I think that was the mentality.
A small little bit of commercial break before we continue and resume our discussion. So ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਜੌਨ ਮੇਜਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਸ ਵਕਤ ਦੀਆਂ ਖਾਮੀਆਂ 1985 ਦਾ ਉਹ ਵਕਤ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਤਵਾਦ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਰਿਸਪੌਂਡ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਤਰੀਕਾ ਵੀ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੱਖਰਾ ਸੀਗਾ। ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਸਾਫ਼ ਐਡਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੈਗੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ, ਉਹ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਐਸਟੈਬਲਿਸ਼ਮੈਂਟ ਸਹੀ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਂਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕੀ ਉਸ ਸੀਰੀਅਸਨੈਸ ਜਾਂ ਉਸ ਥ੍ਰੈਟ ਪਰਸੈਪਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਵਕਤ 1984 ਆਪਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਬਲੂ ਸਟਾਰ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅੱਗ ਸੁਲਗ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਜਾਂ ਭੜਕ ਰਹੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਉਹ ਕਰਵਾ ਸਕਦੀ ਸੀ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਨਿਸ਼ਕ ਹਾਦਸੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟਾ ਕਮਰਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੀ ਰਿਕਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਜੌਨ ਮੇਜਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਈ ਨਵੇਂ ਇੰਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨਸ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਸ ਪੂਰੇ ਕੇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੇ ਐਵੀਡੈਂਸਿਸ ਲੂਜ਼ ਆਊਟ ਕੀਤੇ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਵਿਟਨੈਸਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਕਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਪੱਖੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਈ ਖਾਮੀਆਂ ਰਹੀਆਂ। ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਖਸ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮੌਤ ਇੱਕ ਮਰਡਰ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਲਿੰਕ ਕਰਦਾ, ਜਿਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਰਿਕਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋਈ। ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੇ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਜੌਨ ਮੇਜਰ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਜਾਰੀ ਰਹੇਗੀ।